The call came at 3:47 in the afternoon, and I remember the exact minute because I was watching the second hand on the wall clock above my desk, counting down to a meeting I no longer cared about. Quarterly projections, a spreadsheet open on my monitor, the hum of the office HVAC. Then my phone buzzed against the laminate, and Elena's name lit the screen, and the ordinary world ended in the space between one breath and the next. Daniel. Her voice was wrong before she said anything else. Compressed, like she was speaking through clenched teeth. Daniel, where are you? At the office. What's wrong? I need you to listen to me. Don't talk, just listen. There was a sound behind her, a wet sound I couldn't place, and I felt my stomach pull tight against my spine. Something is happening at the hospital. They brought in 3 patients from the bus accident on Route 9, and one of them, Daniel, one of them got up. Got up? He was dead. They called time of death. I watched Dr. Marsh sign the chart, and then he got up, and he bit Marsh's throat out. My co-worker, Greg, walked past my cubicle with a coffee mug shaped like a golf ball. He waved. I did not wave back. I could not move my hand. Elena, where are you right now? Supply closet, 3rd floor. I locked the door, but it's not Daniel. Listen to me. There are more. There are so many more. The radio in here is saying things. They're saying it's spreading. They're saying, stay inside. But I can hear them in the hallway. I can hear them. I'm coming. No. Daniel, no. You are not coming here. Promise me. Promise me you will go home and you will get Maya from school and you will lock every door. Maya gets out at 4. I can be at her school in 20 minutes. Then go. Go right now. Don't come for me. Elena, promise. The wet sound came again, closer this time, and I heard her breath catch, and I heard the soft, particular thud of a body striking a door from the wrong side. My wife had been an emergency room nurse for 11 years. She had told me once, on our anniversary, half a bottle of red between us, that she had learned to recognize the exact pitch of a sound someone makes when they understand they're going to die. I had told her she was being morbid. She had told me I was naive. I promise, I said. I love you, both of you. Tell Maya I... The line went dead. Not cut off, not dropped. Dead in a way that phones used to die when someone yanked the cord out of the wall. That absolute silence that means the other end is no longer attached to anything human. I stared at the screen. The call log said the conversation had lasted 91 seconds. 91 seconds to dismantle a life. Greg came back down the aisle and stopped when he saw my face. Hey man, you okay? You look like you're gonna throw up. I stood. My chair rolled back into the partition behind me with a small dry sound. Greg's face shifted from concern to confusion as I walked past him without speaking. Past the front desk, where Marcy was laughing into her headset about something her daughter had said. Past the elevator I did not trust. Down 4 flights of stairs into a parking garage, where my reflection in the car window looked like a man who had aged 6 years in 100 seconds. I started the engine. I did not turn on the radio. I did not want to hear yet what I already knew. I drove toward Maya's school with both hands tight enough on the wheel that my knuckles went the color of bone. And I told myself, over and over, that 91 seconds was not the same as goodbye. The first body I saw was on Belfort Avenue, 3 blocks from the school, lying half on the sidewalk and half in the gutter, with its arms folded under it like a person who had simply decided to lie down in the middle of the afternoon. A woman in business clothes stood near it, phone pressed to her ear, weeping in the controlled way of someone still trying to maintain a professional voice. I slowed the car. She looked up at me. She did not wave for help. She just shook her head, slowly, as though warning me away from something I could not yet see. Then the body moved. It happened with no announcement, no twitch of warning. One moment, it was a shape on concrete. The next moment, it was on its knees, then its feet, and the woman was screaming into her phone. And I pressed the accelerator hard enough that my back pressed into the seat. And I did not look in the rearview mirror because I already knew what I would see. Maya's school sat behind a low brick wall on Cottonwood Street, ringed by oak trees that had been there longer than the building. I pulled into the loop where parents normally idled with engines running and saw instead chaos pretending to be order. Teachers stood at the doors holding clipboards. Children clustered in groups by grade. A police cruiser sat at the curb with its lights spinning silently. No siren, no urgency announced. Just the rotating red and blue, painting the brick wall in slow, alternating colors. I left the car running and ran across the loop. "I'm here for Maya Vance, 3rd grade, Mrs. Ortiz." The teacher at the door, a young man I did not recognize, scanned a list with a hand that was visibly shaking. "Vance, yes. She's still inside, in the gym. They're holding the younger ones inside until what?" He looked up at me. He was maybe 24 years old. He had the eyes of someone whose entire framework for understanding the world had collapsed in the last 40 minutes, and who was still attempting to function inside the wreckage. "I don't know," he said, "until someone tells us what to do. I'm taking her now." "Sir, we need to verify. My wife is dying in a hospital across town. I am taking my daughter now." Something in my voice must have arrived in his face the way it arrived in mine, because he stepped aside and pointed down a hallway I knew by heart from 100 school events, recitals, parent conferences. I walked through the corridor past walls of construction paper turkeys left over from a holiday 3 weeks gone, past a row of small jackets hung on small hooks, and I found Maya sitting cross-legged on the gym floor in a cluster of other children, drawing in a notebook she carried everywhere. She looked up. She was 8 years old. She had her mother's eyes and my stubborn mouth and a small constellation of freckles across her nose that I had counted once when she was a baby, and I could not believe she was real. "Dad," she said. "They said we have to stay. We're leaving." Mrs. Ortiz said, "Maya, pack your bag, right now." She studied my face the way she studied everything, with the unhurried gravity of a child who had always been older than her years. Then she stood, slid her notebook into her backpack, and slipped her hand into mine without another question. That trust was a weight I have carried every day since. We walked back through the corridor. We passed the young teacher, who watched us go without speaking. We walked out into a parking lot where the sky had begun to do something strange to the west. A column of black smoke climbing in a thin, steady line above the rooftops. And I lifted my daughter into the passenger seat and buckled her in myself, the way I had done when she was 4. And I did not let her see my hands shake. "Where's Mom?" she asked. "Mom's coming," I lied. "We're going to wait for her at home." Our house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac in a neighborhood called Linden Hollow, a development that had been new the year Elena and I got married and was now beginning to show the soft erosions of a decade lived in. I drove the long way home because the short way crossed Route 9, and Route 9 was where Elena had said the bus accident had been. And I did not want Maya to see whatever was on Route 9 now. She watched the window in silence for most of the drive. She did not ask why a man in a torn shirt was sprinting full speed across a strip mall parking lot. She did not ask why the radio, when I finally turned it on at low volume, was repeating the same automated message about civil defense protocols and shelter-in-place orders. She just watched and drew small shapes on the fogged glass with her fingertip. And I understood with a slow, sinking weight that my daughter had already begun the work of pretending not to notice things she could not survive noticing. At a red light on Henderson, an older man in a cardigan stepped off the curb and approached my window. I almost rolled it down. Years of suburban politeness almost rolled it down. Then I saw the way his head tilted, the way his eyes did not track the car, but rather seemed to register it only as a source of sound. And I ran the red light hard enough that Maya's backpack slid off the seat into the footwell. "Sorry," I said. "It's okay," she said. She did not say what we both knew, which was that I had just run a red light to escape a man who did not know he was a man anymore. Our garage door rolled up on its familiar squeak. I pulled in, hit the button, watched the door descend behind us with the slow finality of a vault closing. Then I sat with both hands on the wheel and tried to remember how to breathe. "Dad." "Yeah." "Is Mom going to come home?" I turned to look at her. She had unbuckled her seatbelt. She was holding her notebook against her chest, the way she used to hold a stuffed rabbit she had finally outgrown the year before. Her face was composed in a way that an 8-year-old's face should never need to be composed. "I don't know, sweetheart." I had promised myself, in the 17 minutes between Elena's call and arriving at the school, that I would not lie to Maya. Not about this. Lies to children are a debt that comes due with interest, and I had already seen how short the future might be. She nodded. She did not cry. She climbed out of the car and walked into the house, and I followed her. And the first thing I did inside our quiet kitchen, with its half-finished mug of coffee Elena had left on the counter that morning, was lock every door and window on the ground floor and pull every curtain shut. The landline still worked. I tried Elena's cell. It went straight to voicemail. The carrier's recorded voice telling me the subscriber was unavailable. I tried the hospital. The main number rang 14 times, and then a recorded message said all circuits were busy. I tried 911. I got a busy signal, the kind I had not heard since I was a child. Maya sat at the kitchen table and opened her notebook and began to draw with the careful concentration of someone constructing a small, contained world. Outside, somewhere in the neighborhood, a car alarm began to wail. It went on for a long time. Eventually it stopped, not because someone had silenced it, but because something had broken whatever was making the sound. I stood at the kitchen window with the curtain pulled back a quarter-inch and watched the empty street. And I waited for headlights that I already understood would not come. By the third day, the power flickered for the first time. By the 5th day, it went out for good. I had spent the intervening time doing the only thing I knew how to do, which was solve problems with my hands, because solving problems with my hands was the only thing keeping the larger, unsolvable problem from devouring me. I moved the heavy oak bookshelf from the living room and braced it against the front door. I drained the bathtubs and refilled them with fresh water before the pressure dropped. I emptied the chest freezer in the garage and cooked everything that could be cooked, layering meals into the refrigerator we would lose by week's end. Maya helped without being asked. She held the flashlight while I worked under the sink. She passed me screws from a small plastic cup. She did not ask about her mother again, not once. And her silence on that subject became a thing I carried with me from room to room, like a stone in my pocket. On the 4th night, our neighbor Hollis came to our back fence. I almost did not recognize him in the dim light. He was a retired contractor in his late 60s, a wide, quiet man who had built half the fences in Linden Hollow and who had, the previous summer, helped me install a new water heater for no other payment than a 6-pack of cheap beer in the company. He stood on his side of the fence with a hunting rifle slung across his back, and a face that looked like he had been sleeping in his clothes. "Daniel." "Hollis." "You got the girl?" "I got her." "Wife?" I shook my head once. I did not trust my voice to do more. He absorbed this the way he absorbed everything, with a small nod and no commentary. Then he said, "There's 3 of them in the Petersons' yard. They came up the easement behind the elementary. They're slow, but they ain't stupid. I'm gonna deal with it tonight after dark. I'd rather you knew before you heard the shots." "Do you need help?" "I need you to stay with your girl and keep your lights off. That's the help." "Hollis." "Yeah." "What's happening out there? Past the neighborhood. Have you heard anything?" He looked at me for a long moment. The crickets had not stopped. The crickets, I had begun to notice, did not seem to know that anything had changed. Some part of me found a strange comfort in that. "My boy's a paramedic up in Eastfield," Hollis said finally. "He called me Tuesday morning. He said the hospitals fell first. Said the staff didn't know what they were dealing with, and by the time they did, it was already inside the buildings. Said the cities are gone, Daniel. Not failing, gone. Said the National Guard set up cordons around the population centers, and then the cordons fell too, because the people inside the cordons turned into the thing the cordons were meant to keep out." "Where's your son now?" "Don't know. Haven't heard from him since Tuesday." We stood in the dark and did not speak for a while. Somewhere 2 streets over, a dog was barking. The steady, frantic barking of an animal that has been barking for a very long time and is going to keep barking until it cannot anymore. "Daniel," Hollis said, "listen. There's a few of us still here on the block. Me, the Achebes across from you, the young couple in the cul-de-sac, the ones with the baby. We're talking about pooling what we got. Sharing watch. You in?" "I'm in." "Tomorrow night. My garage. Bring whatever food you can spare for show. Bring the girl. People need to see her. Reminds them what we're doing this for." He turned to leave. Then he stopped, his hand on the fence post. "Daniel, the wife, I'm sorry." I could not answer him. He nodded once and walked back across his yard, and a few hours later, after Maya was asleep on the couch with my jacket pulled up to her chin, I heard 3 rifle shots in the distance, evenly spaced, the work of a careful man taking care of his street. Hollis's garage smelled like motor oil and dust, and the specific sweet rot of a refrigerator that had been opened one too many times since the power went. 6 adults sat on folding chairs in a loose circle. A single battery-powered lantern threw long shadows up the walls. Maya sat on a stack of car magazines beside me, drawing in her notebook, pretending not to listen and listening to every word. The Achebes were a couple in their 50s, both engineers, both calm in a way that I would later come to understand was not absence of fear, but mastery of it. Their names were Ifeanyi and Adaize. They had 2 grown children in other cities and had not been able to reach either of them in 9 days. The young couple were Thomas and Hannah Reyes. Their baby, 11 months old, slept in a sling against Hannah's chest. Tomas wore a high school football jersey under a flannel shirt and looked like a man who had not slept since the first night. Hollis spoke first. He laid out what he knew. The neighborhood had 3 access points: the main entrance off Linden Boulevard, the back gate behind the playground, and the easement that ran along the elementary school fence line. The main entrance was already partially blocked by a delivery truck that had crashed against the brick sign during the second night. The back gate had been chained by someone before the power went. No one knew who. The easement was the weak point. "We need to close the easement," Ifeanyi said. "Permanently." "With what?" Tomas asked. "With the cars in the school parking lot. There must be 15 of them still there. People left work, picked up their kids, never came back for their second vehicle. We push them into the easement. We layer them. We bridge them with whatever metal we can scavenge." "That's a lot of work for 5 adults and a kid," Hollis said. "6 adults," Adiz said quietly. She nodded toward Maya. "And 1 watcher. She can sit on the roof and tell us what's coming. That is not nothing." Maya looked up from her notebook. She did not speak. But she met Adiz's gaze, and something passed between them. Something I did not yet have a name for. And I felt the small, fierce, protective animal in my chest stir against the bars of its cage. "She's 8, I said. "She is 8 in a world where 8 does not mean what it used to mean," Adiz replied. Her voice was not unkind. It was simply true, in the way that some sentences are simply true, regardless of whether you wish them to be. We are not asking her to fight. We are asking her to see. Children see better than adults. They have not yet learned what to ignore. I looked at Maya. She looked back at me. She nodded once, the smallest nod, and the decision was made before I could refuse it. We worked for 3 days on the easement. We pushed cars in neutral down the slight grade from the school lot. We jacked up tires and let them down on rims. We wedged a school bus crosswise at the narrowest point and slashed its tires so it could not be moved without effort that no Walking Dead thing would invest. By the end of the 3rd day, the easement was a maze of metal that a person could still climb through with patience, but that the slow, shuffling things outside the wall would batter themselves against without progress. On the 2nd day of work, while Ifeanyi and I were chaining a sedan's bumper to a chain-link post, he said without looking at me, "Your wife." "Don't. I am not asking. I am telling you something. My sister was a nurse in Lagos during an Ebola outbreak in 2014. She told me once that nurses do not die surprised. They die having done the math. Your wife knew the math when she called you. She used her last minutes to make sure her daughter would have a father. Do not waste that. Do not collapse into it. Live as though her math was correct." I did not answer him. I tightened the chain. I tightened it harder than necessary. He let me. The neighborhood became a small country in the weeks that followed, and like all small countries, it developed its own customs, its own currencies, its own quiet politics. Water was rationed by the rain barrels Hollis had been collecting for years before any of this began, which made him, by accident of foresight, the most powerful person on the block. Food came from cleared pantries, from the deer Tomas shot with a crossbow he had bought in a midlife flush of unused ambition, from a vegetable garden the Akebis had been cultivating in their backyard for a decade, and that now fed 9 people. 9. Because 3 weeks into our sealed life, a man named Garrett Voss walked up to the main entrance from the outside. He arrived at dusk, hands raised, no weapon visible, a single backpack on his shoulders. Hollis spotted him from the rooftop perch we had built above his garage and called down mine. We assembled at the barricade. Garrett stood on the far side of the delivery truck and looked at us with the careful, flat expression of a man who had been refused entry to other places. He was perhaps 40, lean, a few days of beard, a thin scar across the bridge of his nose that looked old. He said his name. He said he had walked from the eastern edge of the city. He said he had been a paramedic. He said he had supplies in his pack worth trading, and skills worth more than that. "Show us the bite," Hollis said. "There is no bite." "Show us anyway." Garrett stripped down to his underwear in the cold October dusk, slowly, methodically, turning so we could see every surface of his skin. There was no bite. There was an old appendix scar, a tattoo of a date on his ribs that he did not explain, and a long, thin line on his left forearm that looked like a knife had once made a slow argument against his flesh. He dressed again. He waited. "Why us?" Adaize asked. "Why this neighborhood?" "I tried 4 other places," Garrett said. 2 turned me away with guns. 1 let me in, and then I left. After I saw what they did to a woman they had also let in. 1 was already overrun by the time I got there. Yours is the first I have approached that has children visible, and adults who do not look like they are enjoying any of this." Hollis looked at me. He looked at Ifeanyi. He looked at Thomas. He looked at his wife, who had not been at the first meeting because she had been sick, and who I now realized I had not seen since that first meeting. He took a long breath. "You stay in the Petersons' empty house for 14 days, Hollis said. "We bring you food and water. You do not enter the rest of the neighborhood until the 14 days are up. If you are not sick by then, you are one of us. If you are sick, we deal with it." "Fair," Garrett said. He walked, escorted by Thomas and Hollis, to the empty house 2 doors down from mine. They locked him in. They posted the key on a nail in Hollis's garage. The neighborhood, which had been 8 people, became 9, with the understanding that the 9th was provisional. That night, Maya asked me whether the new man was good or bad. "I don't know yet," I said. "How do you know with people?" she asked. "How do you tell?" I thought about Elena. I thought about her voice in the supply closet. I thought about Ifeanyi's hands on the chain. I thought about Hollis's 3 evenly spaced rifle shots. "You watch what they do when they think nothing is at stake," I said. "Anyone can be brave when something matters. Watch how they treat the small things. Watch how they speak to people who can't help them. That tells you." She wrote this down in her notebook. I saw her write it down. She had begun to keep a record of things I said, a thing I did not know whether to be proud of or terrified by. And I think both at once, in equal measure, was the correct response. Garrett survived his 14 days. He emerged thinner, paler, but uninfected. And on the 15th morning he walked into Hollis's garage carrying his backpack and laid its contents out on the workbench. 2 bottles of antibiotics, a suture kit, a working ham radio with a hand-crank charger, 3 boxes of 9mm ammunition, and a small leather-bound notebook in which he had been keeping, since the first day, a meticulous record of every settlement and survivor cluster he had encountered between the eastern edge of the city and our cul-de-sac. "There are others," he said. "Not many, but others." He turned the notebook around and showed us his map. A church in the warehouse district that had taken in roughly 30 people and was holding. A farm out near the reservoir, run by an extended family that had refused all outsiders but had not, as far as Garrett knew, fired on anyone. A high school gymnasium in a town 15 miles north that had become something darker, something Garrett did not describe in detail, and that none of us pressed him on. "And the cities?" Ifeanyi asked. "The cities are not coming back." He said it without weight, without drama, the way a doctor delivers a diagnosis he has had to deliver many times. We absorbed it. Hannah, who had been swaying gently with the baby, stopped swaying. Tomas put his hand on her shoulder. Hollis stared at the map for a long time. "Why are you showing us this?" I asked. Garrett looked at me. He had the kind of face that did not give much away by accident. And so when something did show, you noticed it. Something showed now. Grief, I thought, or its cousin. Because nothing small survives alone. We last another month, 2 months, maybe 3 with the garden producing. Then winter, then spring with empty pantries. The neighborhoods that survive will be the ones that found each other before the cold. You want us to reach out to the church, Hollis said. I want us to send 2 people, quietly, to see what they are. If they are what I think they are, we open trade. If they are not, we know that too. And who would go? Adaiz said. Me, Garrett said. I know the route. And one other. Someone the rest of you trust to come back and tell you the truth, even if the truth is ugly. The silence stretched. Eyes moved around the garage. They did not, in the end, settle on me. They settled on Ifeanyi. He nodded slowly, with the resignation of a man who had been expecting the nomination since Garrett had laid the notebook on the table. I spoke before I decided to speak. I'll go, with Garrett. Ifeanyi looked at me, startled. You have a child here, he said. I have a child who needs a world to grow into. You have a wife. Hollis runs the watch. Tomas has a baby. I'm the one who can be spared. It came out harder than I meant it to. Adaiz's mouth tightened. Hollis looked at his boots. Maya, who had been sitting in the corner pretending to read a manual about lawnmower repair, did not look up. But I saw her hand still on the page. I had not told her yet. I had decided in the same breath that I would go, and that I would not tell her until the morning of departure. Because she had become a person who carried other people's decisions on her small back. And I did not want her to carry this one for any longer than she had to. That night, after she was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with the leather notebook Maya had given me weeks ago, the spare from her stack, and I wrote her a letter. I wrote about her mother. I wrote about the things I'd not yet been able to say out loud. I wrote about the 91 seconds and the promise and the math Ifeanyi had told me about. The math that nurses do. I wrote that if I did not come back, she should find Adaiz, who would teach her things I could not, and Hollis, who would protect her with the same quiet competence he protected the rest of us with, and that she should forgive me for not being braver sooner in 100 small ways before the world ended. I put the letter in the kitchen drawer beneath the dish towels. I hoped she would never read it. We left before dawn on a Tuesday. Garrett had a hand-drawn map and a route that avoided every main road. I had a hunting knife I had never used for anything more demanding than cutting twine, a small revolver Hollis had pressed into my hands, with 6 bullets and the instruction to keep one of them, always, for myself. We carried water for 2 days and food for 3, and the ham radio Garrett had brought, which Ifeanyi would monitor from the garage on a schedule we had agreed upon. Maya hadn't cried when I told her. That was worse than crying. She had listened, sitting on the edge of her bed with her hands folded in her lap, and when I finished, she had asked me one question. Are you coming back? I am going to try with everything I have. That isn't the same as yes. No, I said. It isn't. She had nodded. She had hugged me, not for very long. The careful hug of a child who has learned that long hugs hurt more than short ones, because long hugs trick you into believing they will not end. Then she had handed me a folded piece of paper from her notebook and told me not to read it until I was out of the neighborhood. I unfolded it at the easement gate. It was a drawing. 3 figures, tall and small, holding hands in front of a house. Above them, in her careful round letters, she had written, "Come home." I folded it again. I put it in my breast pocket. Garrett, who had been waiting at the gate, did not ask. I think he knew. He had a wedding ring on a string around his neck that he never spoke of, and that I had never asked about. We walked. The first hours were quiet. We followed a drainage easement out of Linden Hollow and crossed a strip of woods I had jogged through in another life on Saturday mornings. We saw no infected. We saw a deer, gaunt and watchful, and a raccoon that had grown unafraid of humans in the absence of humans. Garrett moved with the economical pace of someone who had walked far before. I tried to match him. I sweated through my shirt by mid-morning, despite the cold. Around noon we crested a low rise and saw below us the warehouse district. From a distance it looked almost normal. Long, flat buildings, a water tower with a logo I did not recognize. Streets laid out in a grid. Then the wind shifted and I smelled it. The smell I'd been carrying in my nostrils since the first week. The smell that meant the dead had been left to be dead in the open air for a long time. 3 blocks south, Garrett said. Then we'll see the church. We descended. We moved between buildings. We did not speak. Garrett held up his hand once, and we froze for 9 minutes against the wall of a loading dock, while something we could not see shuffled along an alley parallel to us. When the sound faded, he gestured, and we moved again. The church was a converted warehouse, painted white once, gray now, with a steel cross welded to the roof and a fence of shipping containers around its perimeter. As we approached, a voice from above called out for us to stop and identify ourselves. Garrett raised his hands. He gave his name. He said he had been there before, 2 months ago, when he had passed through. He said the woman who had let him in then had been named Sister Pauline. The voice above us was silent for a long time. Then it said, "Sister Pauline is dead, but you can come in." The gate slid open. We stepped inside. I will not, in this telling, describe everything we saw in the church compound that afternoon and evening. I will say that there were people there, real people, eating real food, with real children running between the buildings. I will say that their leader, a tired man named Brother Aaron, who had been an accountant before the world ended, sat with us for 2 hours and looked at our map of Linden Hollow and asked careful questions and made careful proposals. I will say that we agreed to a first exchange, a small one, ammunition for fresh garden produce, to be made at a designated waypoint in 2 weeks. I will say that Garrett and I walked out at dusk with the beginning of something larger than ourselves folded into Garrett's notebook. And I will say that we did not, on the walk back, talk about how the math had begun to change. We were 2 miles from home when the world went wrong. It was the 4th hour of the return trip. We had taken a different route back, partly out of caution, partly because Garrett had wanted to scout a possible alternate path for the future trade run. The sun was low. The air had that thin gold quality that late autumn afternoons sometimes have. And for a moment, walking beside Garrett through a stand of bare trees, I had felt something close to peace. Not happiness, not hope, but the absence of immediate dread. It had been so long since I had felt the absence of immediate dread that I had not, at first, recognized what I was feeling. Then we came around a bend in the path, and there were 4 of them. They had not heard us. They were clustered around something on the ground, a dog maybe. I never let myself look closely enough to be sure. The wind was in our faces. Garrett dropped instantly into a crouch, and I followed half a second behind, my knee hitting a rock hard enough to send a flare of pain up my thigh that I forced myself to swallow. He gestured. Back, slow, quiet. We retreated step by step the way we had come. We made it perhaps 20 yards before my foot found a dry branch, and the branch found its voice. And 4 heads turned at once, and 4 mouths opened, and the thin air filled with the sound I will hear in my dreams until I do not dream anymore. We ran. Garrett was faster than me. He was lighter, longer-legged, more practiced. But he did not pull ahead. He matched my pace, and when I stumbled at a creek crossing, he hauled me up by the back of my jacket without breaking stride. And when one of the things behind us got close enough that I could hear its breath, he turned and fired twice, with the pistol he had not previously drawn, and the breath stopped. But there were still three. We made the edge of a culvert beneath a service road, and Garrett pulled me down into it and clapped his hand over my mouth. And the three of them rushed past above us, and we waited, and we waited. And after a very long time, the woods went quiet again. We did not speak. We crawled out the other end of the culvert. We walked the last mile in a silence so total that I could hear the small, wet click of Garrett's jaw whenever he swallowed. It was only when we reached the easement gate and Hollis came out to meet us, lantern held high, that I saw the dark patch on Garrett's left sleeve. He saw me see it. He looked down at it himself, for a long moment, as though noticing it for the first time. Then he looked up at me. "It's not a bite," he said. "I caught it on a fence." Hollis came closer. He raised the lantern. He looked. He did not speak. Garrett pushed up the sleeve himself. He did it slowly, the way a man removes the bandage from a wound he already knows the shape of. Beneath the fabric was a half-moon of broken skin, 4 small punctures, 2 of them deep. The blood around them had already begun to darken in a way that healthy blood does not darken. "Hollis," Garrett said. His voice was very even. "I am going to ask you something. I am going to ask you to do it tonight, before the rest of them see. I'm going to ask you to do it in the woods, where Daniel and I came in, so the little girl doesn't hear." Hollis lowered the lantern. The light pooled around our feet. His face, in that downward illumination, looked carved from something harder than flesh. "Garrett," he said, "please." "I'll do it," Hollis said, "but not alone. Daniel comes." I did not have time to refuse. Garrett looked at me. There was no plea in his face. There was something worse than a plea. There was a request, made between 2 men who had walked a long road together and come back almost whole. "Daniel," he said, "I would like a witness who knew me on a good day." We walked back into the woods, the 3 of us, the lantern, the pistol. Garrett did not ask us to wait. He did not draw it out. He spoke for perhaps 2 minutes about a woman whose name I will not write here, and about a son he had not seen since the 2nd week of the outbreak, and about the wedding ring on the string around his neck, which he removed and pressed into my hand and asked me to keep until I found a child who deserved a story about a man who had tried. Then he turned away from us, and he looked up at the stars, which had begun to come out, and he closed his eyes. Hollis did it. We buried him in the soft dirt beside the culvert. We did not mark the grave. We walked back to the neighborhood and we told the others that Garrett had not come back, that we had been separated, that we had searched, and we had failed. It was the first lie I told to the people who had become my family. It was not the last. It was, in some ways, the kindest one I knew how to tell. That night, I sat in my kitchen and I held the wedding ring in my hand for a long time. And I thought about Elena. And I thought about 91 seconds. And I understood, in a way I had not understood before, what Ifeanyi had meant about the math. The first trade with the church happened 9 days later, at a waypoint Garrett had marked on his map but never lived to see used. Hollis and I went. We carried 2 crates of canned tomatoes from Adaisa's late summer preservation and a sealed jar of seeds she had been hoarding for spring. They brought ammunition. 2 bottles of insulin Tomas had not known he needed, until Hannah confessed she had been rationing her own supply since the first week. And a battered Bible that nobody on our end had asked for, and that Brother Aaron had pressed into Hollis's hands with a small, embarrassed smile. The exchange took 12 minutes. We did not embrace, we did not linger. We confirmed the next waypoint and the next date, and we walked back the way we had come, watchful, weapons ready, and we did not breathe properly until the gate of the easement closed behind us. The neighborhood, when we returned, had changed without my noticing how quickly. Maya had grown 2 inches that fall. She had begun to braid her own hair in the mornings, a thing Elena had always done for her. And she did it badly, but she did it without help. And the small fact of it broke something in me every time I saw her sit at the kitchen mirror in the early light. She had also, in my 9-day absence and the days since, become something the neighborhood relied on in small ways. She kept the watch logs. She marked the days on a calendar in Hollis's garage. She had begun, at Adaise's quiet insistence, to learn the names of every plant in the garden and the medicinal property of every herb in the small greenhouse the Akebes had built before any of this began. She was not a child anymore in any way that mattered. She was a small person doing the work of a small person in a world that no longer had room for childhood in the shape we had once known it. One evening in late November, she came to me in the kitchen while I was patching a torn shirt with thread I'd begun to ration like ammunition. She had her notebook with her. She opened it to a page she had marked with a folded corner. "Dad." "Yeah." "I want to ask you something and I want you to answer me like I'm a grown-up." I put the needle down. "Okay?" "When Mom called you from the hospital." She paused. Her voice did not shake, but her hands, holding the edges of the notebook, did. "Did she say anything about me at the end?" I had been waiting for this question for 2 months. I had thought about it every day. I had prepared in my head 100 different answers, some true and some kind and some both. And in the moment I found that none of the prepared answers fit the small, grave face of my daughter at the kitchen table. "She did," I said. "She said to tell you that she loved you." She started to say something else. The line went dead before she could finish. What do you think she was going to say? I considered lying. I considered making up something beautiful, something Maya could carry, something that would close the wound her mother's last sentence had left open in the air between them. I did not lie. "I don't know, sweetheart. I have thought about it every day. I have made up answers and thrown them away. The truth is that I don't know what she was going to say, and neither of us is ever going to know. And that is one of the things we are going to have to learn how to live with." She nodded. She closed the notebook. She came around the table, and she climbed into my lap, the first time she had done so in over a year. And she put her arms around my neck, and she cried, finally, for the first time since the call. And I held her, and I did not speak, because there were no words that would not have made it worse. When she was done, she wiped her face with the back of her hand, and she said very quietly, I think she was going to say, "Tell Maya I tried." "Maybe," I said. "Maybe that's exactly what she was going to say." "It's what I would have said," Maya said, "if I were her." I did not sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen window and I watched the moon move across our small, dead street. And I understood that my daughter had begun to grow into a version of her mother I had not expected to meet. And I did not know whether to weep or be grateful. And so I did both quietly in the dark, where nobody could see. Winter came hard that year. The first deep snow fell on the second week of December and did not melt. The temperature dropped below 20 degrees and stayed there. We had wood because Hollis had been cutting it since September, but we had not had enough time to cut as much as we needed. And by the mid-January, we were burning fence pickets and the slats of an old swing set that had stood untouched in the yard of the empty house at the end of the street. The cold did one thing for us, which was that it slowed the infected. They did not freeze, exactly, but they moved as though their joints had begun to argue with the idea of motion. We saw fewer of them at the easement. The ones we did see moved like men walking through water. The cold did many things against us, which I will not list in full. The Reyes baby got sick in the 3rd week of January. A fever, then a cough, then a wet rattle in the chest that woke me in my own bed 2 houses away, through windows we had stopped opening. Hannah came to my door at 2 in the morning, the baby in her arms, asking whether the antibiotics from the church trade might do anything, knowing the answer, asking anyway. The baby died at dawn. We buried him under the apple tree in the Akebe's yard, because the ground in our own yards was too frozen to break. And Adaeze had been turning her garden bed with hot water for days against exactly this need. Hannah did not speak for a week afterward. Tomas drank his way through a bottle of something old he had been saving. And then he stopped drinking. And then he sat with his wife in their kitchen and held her hand for 3 days. And then they both got up and they went back to work, because work was the only mercy the world still offered to the bereaved. Maya took it harder than I had expected and easier than I had feared. She did not cry. She had cried out, perhaps, the night in my lap. And what was left in her now was something quieter and more durable. She made a small drawing of the baby in her notebook, from memory, and she gave it to Hannah. And Hannah hung it on the refrigerator door that no longer cooled anything. And she touched it every morning before she went out to whatever the day asked of her. In February, the church missed a trade. We waited at the waypoint for 6 hours. They did not come. We left a note in the small, sealed tin we had agreed upon, and we walked back. And 3 days later, we returned. And the note was undisturbed. We tried the radio at every scheduled hour for a week. Nothing. "We should go look," I said, in Hollis's garage on the 8th day. "In what?" Hollis said. "Through what? We don't have the fuel for the truck, and even if we did, the roads between here and there, in this snow. On foot, 2 of us, the route Garrett showed me. And if they're gone, then we know. And if they're worse than gone." I did not have an answer for that. In the end, 3 of us went. Me, Hollis, and Ifeanyi. We walked in the cold for 2 days, sleeping in a service shed the first night. And when we came around the last corner before the warehouse district, we saw the smoke. It had not been a fast fire. The shipping container fence had held against whatever had come for a while. But something had come, and something had broken through. And what was left of the church compound was a black skeleton of burnt timber and twisted metal. And the bodies on the ground had been there long enough that the cold had done its work on them, and they were not getting up again. We did not enter the compound. We did not look for survivors. Hollis stood for a long moment at the edge of what had been the gate, and he took off his hat, and he held it in both hands at his waist, and he said nothing. We walked home through a deeper snow than we had walked out in, and the silence between us was the silence of 3 men who had just understood, simultaneously, that small countries do not survive alone, and that small countries do not always survive together either, and that the math, as Ifeanyi had once said, is the math, and the math does not care. The thaw came late that year, in mid-March, and with it came the strangers. Not infected, strangers. Living people who had heard, somehow, through the thin underground that had begun to connect the survivor pockets, that there was a neighborhood at the end of Linden Boulevard where the lights still occasionally came on, and where sometimes The smoke from a chimney suggested that someone was still alive to keep a fire burning. They came in twos and threes. We turned most of them away. Hollis had grown harder over the winter, and he refused entry to anyone who did not bring a skill we did not have, or a story we could verify. We let in a woman named Iris, who had been a veterinarian and who could, in the absence of doctors, set a bone and recognize an infection. We let in a man named Caleb, who had been a farmer and who walked our garden plot once and told Adaizi 3 things she had been doing wrong, gently, and who she immediately decided she liked. We turned away 17 others. Some of them cursed us. Some of them wept. One of them, a thin man in his 30s, with eyes that had stopped reading the world correctly, came back at night with a knife and tried to climb the easement. And Hollis shot him from the roof and did not speak for the rest of the day. The neighborhood, which had been 9, then 8, became 10, then 11. We were running out of houses to put people in. We were running out of food faster than the garden could produce. The math was changing again. It was Ifeanyi, in the end, who said what no one else had been willing to say. We have to leave. We were in Hollis's garage. It had become, by accident and by gravity, the seat of whatever government we had. 5 of us sat around the workbench. Maya sat at her usual stack of magazines in the corner, drawing, listening. "Leave where?" Hollis said. "Leave here. The neighborhood is not viable past summer. The garden cannot feed 11. The well in the Petersons' yard is going brackish. The infected are starting to push at the easement in numbers we did not see in the fall. We need to move while we still have the strength to move." "To where?" "There is a farm. Garrett's notebook, the one out by the reservoir." They turned him away, but he wrote that they were not hostile, only cautious. If we approach as a group, with skills and goods and a clear offer, perhaps they reconsider. And if they don't? Then we have learned that they don't, and we keep moving, and we find the next place. We have become good at moving carefully. We have become good at deciding. We are not the people we were in October. Hollis, we can do this. The argument went on for 3 days. It split the neighborhood. Hannah and Thomas did not want to leave the apple tree where their son was buried. Hollis did not want to leave the house his wife had died in, because his wife had, I had learned by then, died in the first week, quietly, in their bedroom. And he had buried her in the back garden under a flat stone he visited every morning at dawn. Adeyeza did not want to leave the garden she had built over a decade. In the end, the math decided. The garden could not feed us. The well was failing. The easement would not hold against a determined push. We could leave together in spring with a chance, or we could stay together in summer with none. We voted on a Tuesday evening, 8-3 in favor of leaving. We agreed to depart in 2 weeks, when the last of the snow was gone, and the roads, such as they were, would be passable on foot with carts. That night, Maya asked me, "What about our house?" "What about it?" "It's the last place Mom knew we were." I sat down on the edge of her bed. I took her hand. I thought, for a long time, about how to answer her. "Mom knew we would do whatever we had to do to be safe," I said. That was the last thing she asked of me. She did not ask me to stay in this house. She asked me to keep you alive. The house is wood and brick. We are taking everything that matters with us, sweetheart. We are taking each other. She thought about this. She nodded slowly. "Can I take her sweater?" she said. "You can take anything you can carry." She climbed out of bed and she went to my closet, and she took down Elena's blue cardigan, the one Elena had worn the morning she went to her last shift, the one I'd been unable to move from where she had left it on the back of the chair. Maya folded it carefully. She put it in her pack. I did not stop her. I did not help her. I sat on the edge of the bed, and I watched my daughter pack her mother's sweater for a journey her mother would never take. And I understood that some of us carry our dead with us, not because we cannot let them go, but because they are part of the reason we are still walking. We left Linden Hollow on the morning of April 3rd, 11 people and 2 carts and 1 small dog that had wandered into the neighborhood in February and had refused, with the firm political opinion of dogs, to be turned away. We pulled the easement gate closed behind us. Hollis padlocked it, though there was no one left to keep out and no one left to keep in. The gesture was for us, not for the gate. We walked north along the boulevard for the first hour. We saw 3 infected at distance, on the far side of an overpass, and we changed our route to avoid them. The carts squeaked. The dog trotted at Maya's heel, occasionally bumping her leg, and she had named it, in her quiet way, Tuesday, because that had been the day it arrived. A Daisy walked beside me for a while. She did not speak for a long time. Then she said, "Your wife would be proud of her." I know. She would also be proud of you. I did not answer. I could not just then find the throat for an answer. Adaiz understood this. She let the silence stand, and after a while, she dropped back to walk with her husband, and I walked alone for a time at the front of our small column. Scouting, watching for movement, doing the work of the watch. The journey to the reservoir farm took 6 days. I will not describe each of those days in detail, because each of those days deserves a book of its own. And because the small private griefs and small private kindnesses of a group of people walking together through a broken country are not the kind of thing that compresses well into a single telling. I will say that we lost 1 person on the 3rd day, a man whose name I've written elsewhere and who had been with us since February, who fell off a footbridge in a moment of inattention and broke his neck on a rock below, and that we buried him beside the river with what dignity we could manage. I will say that we found a sealed pharmacy on the 4th day, missed by every previous scavenger, and that the medicines we pulled from it would, in the months that followed, save at least 2 lives that I am aware of. I will say that on the 5th night, around a small fire in a barn we had cleared, Hannah began to sing, very quietly, a lullaby she had once sung to her son, and that no one interrupted her, and that when she finished, Tomas kissed her temple, and they both sat looking into the fire as though it were the first fire they had ever seen. On the morning of the 7th day, we crested a hill and we saw the farm. It sat in a wide valley, surrounded on 3 sides by hills, and on the 4th by the broad gray sheet of the reservoir. The fields had been turned. Smoke rose from 3 chimneys. Cattle moved in a paddock near a long red barn. From the distance of half a mile, it looked like a painting of something that should not have been allowed to survive into the world we now lived in. A man came up the road on a horse. He stopped 100 yards from us, and he watched us for a long time without speaking. Then he turned and rode back toward the farm. We waited. After perhaps an hour, 3 figures came up the road on foot. An older woman in a long coat, a younger man with a rifle, held without aggression but not concealed. A girl perhaps Maya's age, who walked between them with the bold, open curiosity of a child who had not yet been taught to fear strangers. The older woman stopped 10 yards from us. She looked at our group. She looked at the carts. She looked at the children, of which we had 2. Maya and a boy of 5 whose mother had joined us in February. "My name is Ruth," she said. "This is my grandson, Eli. This is my granddaughter, Sarah. You have come a long way. We have, Hollis said. What do you want from us? Hollis looked at Ifeanyi. Ifeanyi looked at me. I stepped forward. I had not planned to. I think the others had been waiting to see whether I would. We want to offer you what we have, in exchange for a place beside you, I said. We have a veterinarian. We have 2 engineers. We have a farmer who knows soil. We have a watcher who has kept the logs of a neighborhood for 6 months without missing a day. We have hands. We have backs. We have the kind of trust that only survives what we have survived. We are asking for ground to stand on. We are not asking for charity. Ruth looked at me for a long moment. Then she looked past me, at Maya, who was standing beside the cart with one hand on Tuesday's head and the other holding the strap of her pack. And the girl with the dog, Ruth said. What does she bring? I started to answer for her. Maya stepped forward before I could. I bring records, Maya said. Her voice was small, but it did not waver. I keep them every day. I will keep them for you. I will draw you a map of everything I have seen, so you do not have to learn it the hard way. Ruth looked at her. She did not smile. But something moved at the corners of her mouth, the kind of movement that in a different face might have been a smile, and that in her face was, I think, something more careful and more earned. Come down to the gate, Ruth said. We will talk. We make no promises, but we will talk. We walked down the hill toward the farm. Tuesday, the dog trotted ahead of us as though she had always known we were going there. Maya took my hand for the first time in months, and she did not let go until we passed the threshold of the gate. We have been here now for 19 months. I am writing this in a small room at the back of the farmhouse, by the light of an oil lamp that Iris, the veterinarian, who turned out also to be a competent mechanic, repaired last winter. Outside, the spring rain is coming down on the new green of the wheat field. Somewhere in the house, I can hear Maya laughing at something Sarah has said. They have become, in the way of children, the kind of friends who finish each other's sentences and fight each other's fights. And Ruth told me last month that watching them is one of the things that has kept her old heart from finally giving up. Not everything has been good. The farm lost 4 people last winter to a sickness that swept through the bunkhouse and that Iris could not name. We have had 2 attempts by raiders, the second of which cost us Ifeanyi, who took a bullet in the shoulder that should not have killed him, and did, because the world we live in does not care what should kill a person and what should not. Adeyeza stayed with us for 3 months after his burial. And then she walked out one morning toward the hills with a pack and a small spade. And she has not come back, and we have not gone looking, because some griefs require a wilderness, and we have respected her right to find one. Hollis is still here. He has aged 10 years and 2. He runs the watch. He sleeps 4 hours a night and walks the perimeter the rest of the time. And he has not, in 19 months, raised his voice at anyone. The children are afraid of him in the way children are afraid of stone walls, which is to say, they understand he is there for them, and they would not want to be on the other side of him. Hannah and Thomas had another baby in the second summer, a girl, and they named her after Hannah's grandmother. The baby is healthy. Hannah sings to her every night, and sometimes the song is the lullaby she once sang to her son. And Tomas sits in the doorway and listens, and his face, in the lamplight, is the face of a man who has learned that joy and grief are not opposites, but neighbors who share a wall. Maya is 10 years old now. She is taller than her mother was at her age. She has Elena's hands, the long, thin fingers of someone whose body was built to do careful work, and she uses them for everything, for sewing, for splinting, for the small, detailed drawings she still makes every evening before bed. She has not, in 19 months, ask me again about the phone call. She does not need to. She has integrated her mother into the architecture of who she is becoming. And Elena lives now in the careful way Maya braids another child's hair, in the way she sets a table for one more person than she expects, in the way she stands at a window at dusk and watches the road without telling me what she is watching for. I am 42 years old. I look 50. My beard has gone gray in patches that make no symmetrical sense. I have killed 7 people who were no longer people, and 1 person who was. I have buried friends. I have lied to my daughter once, and once only, on the day Garrett died. I have not, in all the months since the call, taken off my wedding ring. And I do not intend to. Because some promises are not voided by death, and some marriages outlast the participants. I keep Elena's blue cardigan in a drawer beside my bed. Maya outgrew it last winter. I do not wear it. I take it out sometimes, and I hold it, and I smell it for a trace of the woman who wore it that morning, and there is no trace left, and I put it back, and I sleep. The line went dead at 3:48 in the afternoon on a Tuesday in October, and the world I had lived in for 39 years went with it. What came after has been smaller and harder, and in unexpected ways, more honest. I do not believe in a meaning that justifies any of it. I do not believe that we were spared for a reason, or that those we lost were taken for one. I believe that we made choices, day by day, hour by hour, and that some of those choices were good and some were not, and that we are still standing, because more of them, by a thin margin, were good than were not. I believe that my wife, in her last 91 seconds, did the math, and she used those seconds to send me toward our daughter, and that everything I have done since has been an attempt to be worthy of the gift of those 91 seconds. I believe that is enough. I believe it has to be. Tonight I walked out past the barn to the low fence that separates the home pasture from the wheat field. The rain had stopped. The clouds had opened in the west, and the last light lay across the hills in a long pale band that made the world look, for a moment, like a place that had never broken. Maya came out and stood beside me. She did not speak. She has learned in 19 months when to speak and when not to. She put her hand in mine. Her hand is bigger now than it was on the day I lifted her into the passenger seat outside her school. Soon it will be too big to hold. "Dad," she said. "Yeah." I was thinking about what Mom would have said, the last part. And I think she would have said, "Tell Maya I'm proud of her already." I think she knew. I think she always knew. I could not answer her. I held her hand. The light went out of the western sky slowly, the way light goes when it is in no hurry, and the first stars came out above the hills, and my daughter stood beside me in the new dark, and I understood finally that the line had not gone dead. It had been handed to me, and I had carried it, and now, slowly, I was beginning to learn how to let her carry it too.